All right, we're now um, looking at Objective 6 of Chapter 10 for hazardous materials, and this is basically describing, what are, excuse me, the code requirements for marking of hazardous materials um, for identification as emergency responders, but also as inspectors. So markings that are used to identify containers and the contents within the containers um, and where information is contained in the materials resource guides really assist emergency responders and I say inspectors to help quickly identify, what's in the package, if you will. Uh, the inspector can use that to help determine good whether there's proper storage or handling procedures are adequate during the inspection. Uh, there needs to be detailed information on hazardous materials, which you'll get from those SDS sheets, uh, and those documents need to be present uh, uh, during an inspection and accessible in a timely fashion in order for them to be useful. So we're also looking at, from an inspectional perspective, if you understand how placards are, how they're labeled, what the symbols are, and what the numbering systems that are used by the Department of Transportation, Transport Canada, the Mexican Secretary of Communication of Transports, international government bodies, and any other type of agency that has the task of identifying materials. We as inspectors have to be familiar with the UN classification system, the DOT placarding and marking system as well. There are a handful of books that you need to know how they work and should have to actually have a copy at your disposal. And that's the ERG, the Emergency Response Guidebook, the NIOSH Pocket Guide, and the Hazardous Material Guide for First Responders. That's from the U.S. Fire Academy. Safety data sheets, SDSs, they were used to be known as MSDSs, Material Safety Data Sheets, but uh, there was a global initiative and it was agreed upon that they would be called safety data sheets. It's a detailed information bulletin prepared by the manufacturer or importer or wherever the substance is coming from to give information about hazards with the product that's in the box. Uh, you should be able to, as inspectors, be able to acquire the SDS uh, from the manufacturer, maybe the shipper or supplier. Chemtrek would be a good resource at the facility. They should have that information as part of their HAZCOM program and possibly attached to the shipping papers or the containers. Uh, they're used worldwide. The format is accepted worldwide. Uh, I need I'll reference you to page 403, table 10.7, which kind of goes over the data sheets and the different types of information provided on it. If you've not worked with SDS sheets, take a look at that table. Um, and if you're out doing inspections, or even if you're in the firehouse, there should be SDS sheets somewhere to take a look at and understand what the format is all about. So as inspectors, you may see some SDS sheets that were developed by ANSI, American National Standards Institute, OSHA, or a Canadian standard. Uh, Question: list some of the resources inspectors must be familiar with and know how to use in order to identify hazardous material. Uh, go to 401 in your manual, read through uh, what the resources are and how to access it, and figure out how you, when you go back and do your inspection job, where is that information or that resource for you? Back in 1994, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, became a reality. And it pretty much standardized trade in North America. Trucks carrying products that include hazardous materials move freely from Canada all the way down into Mexico. So there had to be a means uh, to standardize uh, data sheets, if you will, so to help regulate this movement of vehicles and the materials on it. NAFTA partners have adopted the UN recommendations regarding transportation placards, labels, markings, identifying hazardous materials or dangerous goods. Few country-specific variations still exist, but the majority of the placards and labels and markings uh, used to identify the materials are very similar in each country. Uh, these recommendations uh, enhance safety by improving capabilities for accurate recognition of labeling hazardous material and eliminating duplicate or inconsistent marking of the labeling system. Under the UN hazardous classification system, there are 9 classes for hazardous material. These classes enable an inspector to readily categorize hazardous materials based on the risk they pose. So class 1 is explosives, class 2 is gases, 3 flammable and combustible liquids, and 4 flammable solids, spontaneous combustible materials, and dangerous when wet materials. To continue on, class 5 is oxidizers and organic peroxides. 6 is poison, which is toxic, and poison inhalation hazards. 7, radioactive material. 8, corrosive materials. And 9, miscellaneous dangerous goods. Each of these 9 hazard classes has a specific placard that identifies the class of materials and assists an inspector in identifying the hazard associated with the product. A materials hazard class is indicated either by its class or division, number, or name. The hazard class or division number must be displayed in the lower corner of the placards corresponding to the primary hazard of a material. UN Commodity Identification Numbers is a system of 4-digit identification numbers used in conjunction with illustrated placards in North America. Each hazardous material is assigned a unique 4-digit number. The number is often displayed on placards, labels, orange panels, and or white diamonds for materials being transported in cargo tanks, portable tanks, tank cars, or other containers and packages. And as you look on the slide, I put an image of what the emergency response guide looks like. That's a 2020 version. I'm pretty sure there's another edition newer um, than 2020, but most of the format and size is of the manual is pretty much the same. On orange panels, letters UN for United Nations, uh, which means it's recognized for international transportation, may precede the number. The yellow bordered pages section of in the emergency response guide provides a key to the 4-digit identification number uh, that gives you an idea of, starts describing uh, what are some of the actionable steps should you have material that is, uh, you have, might have a material incident. So the inspector can use that 4-digit UN identification number and the ARG to be able to determine what's the appropriate response. Uh, that 4-digit number also appears on shipping papers, should match the numbers displayed on the exterior of the tanks or shipping containers. So as I mentioned earlier, we have an ERG. It should be part of your inventory on your vehicle or what you need for equipment to be able to do your job, especially when you're dealing with uh, a lot of hazardous materials. In North America, the UN numbers are usually found on the following container packages: rail tank cars, cargo tank cars, portable tank cars, and bulk packaging. Vehicle containers uh, that have quantities at least 8,800 or 8,820 pounds of hazardous material, and certain non-bulk packages like poisonous gases in specified amount. All of those you can expect to see a UN number. So DOT regulations, you go to page 407 of your manual and go into more detail about DOT regulations. But when we talk about placards, labels, and markings, uh, although the UN system serves as the basis for most DOT regulations, DOT regulations address some additional categories of substances, including other regulated materials, so that's ORMDs, and materials of trade, MOTs, and fumigated loads. So the inspector needs to record information about these substances during an evaluation of the facility or or industrial location. A basic understanding of the UL system enables the inspector to quickly recognize most hazardous materials or dangerous products or goods. So understanding that the system used in our country, the United States, is important to accurately recognize these hazards. So you're really out there gathering the information, uh, helping yourself being identified by a UN number or some type of identifier that we have, possibly a certain type of material that might pose a hazard. The DOT placard, it's diamond shaped, color coded sign that shippers provide to identify the materials in transportation containers found on a number of containers, including bulk packaging, rail tank cars, cargo tank vehicles, portable tanks, unit loading devices containing hazardous materials over 640 cubic feet in capacity, and certain non-bulk containers. So we all should be familiar with the diamond, uh, the background color, the hazard class number. You got the 4-digit identification number and what the symbol is, and that identifies and sectionalizes hazards, so us as inspectors can pick up on quickly whether what type of hazard that we might have. Some important facts to remember regarding placards. Shippers are required to provide placards. Drivers may not know what they are carrying or may have varying degrees of information about hazardous materials in their vehicles. A placard's not always required for shipments of infectious substances or other regulated materials, or materials of trade. Limited quantities, small quantity packages, radioactive materials, or combustible liquids in non-bulk packaging. So, uh, not all hazards are identified depending on certain things, uh, classifications, the size, the quantity, things like that. So you could still have a hazardous incident, uh, but because of some of the things we just talked about, may not necessarily have to carry any type of labeling. Some private agricultural and military vehicles may not have placards, even though they might be carrying some significant quantities of a hazardous material. For example, farmers may carry fertilizer, pesticides, and fuel between fields or to and from their farms without any placard. The hazard class or the division number corresponding to the primary or subsidiary hazard class of a material must be displayed in the lower corner of a placard, uh, and other than the Class 7 or dangerous placard, text indicating a hazard is not required. Text may be omitted from the oxygen placard only if the specific ID number is displayed. So there are some things over these last couple of slides where there might be exceptions to how we're going to placard. The label, it's printed manner on a 3.9-inch square on-point diamond that may or may not have written text identifying the hazardous material within the packaging. It communicates the hazard posed by the material in case the packaging fails or falls from the transport vehicle and spills its contents. Each label hazard class is assigned an appropriate pictogram as well as a division number. And packaging contains a primary label for materials that meet the definition of more than one hazard class. So looking at primary labeling, uh, we're looking at, you know, the numbering system, the color, that all paint the picture of what type of hazard that has been identified uh, to be on a vehicle or stored somewhere. So when you look at unique DOT labels, go to your page 409 and 410 of your manual. Make yourself familiar with some of those unique labels, and uh, just just understand what they are and uh, and how they're utilized. Uh, Unlike placards that may only be used on the outside of large transport containers, labels are used on non-bulk packaging such as drums, boxes, bags, and other small containers that are normally located inside facilities. When they're used in this manner, an inspector can immediately identify hazardous materials or dangerous goods. By just looking at the label, they have an understanding of what the hazard could be or might be inside the container. A package may have several labels placed side by side with the primary hazard located on the left and the secondary or subsidiary class label on the right. DOT regulations require the subsidiary labels have their class numbers displayed. Inspectors need to be able to identify a DOT marking and be able to understand based on what's on that marking what's inside the package. So there should be the descriptive name, the ID number, a weight or a specification that includes instructions, any cautions, UN marks, all required on the outer package containing any type of hazardous materials or goods. Uh, as inspectors, we do have to pay uh, particular attention and in the receiving areas of warehouses and plants or business to verify the hazardous materials are marked correctly and that they're stored in a manner required. Additionally, we need to be able to verify the exterior markings on the structure are current and reflect what the hazard present. So we're looking at good identification, accurate identification, so that anybody can look at the placard, look at the description, and clearly understand the type of hazard that may be present. Uh, on page 406 to 411, there's a lot of illustrations that compare and contrast DOT placarding labels and markings. Uh, please spend some time going over that, understanding the differences of the placards and of the identifications, so that you can at least understand better how markings are required. There are other markings that you need to be familiar with. Not all markings apply to hazardous material while they're in transit. OSHA's has hazard communication standard requires employers to identify hazards in the workplace and train employees how to recognize those hazards. That's a requirement. And when you look at your International Fire Code, there is that section regarding hazardous communication that includes that type of requirement. Uh, you also have to have your employers to certify that all hazardous materials containers are labeled, tagged, and they're marked correctly along with the appropriate hazard warning. The standard does not specify what identification to use, leaving that up to uh, the the workplace to figure that one out. Uh, Emergency responders and inspectors, you can find a variety of different labeling. Uh, it depends on on the jurisdiction, but it's possible that there could be other ways to mark materials. What are some of the other identification marking requirements? Chemical manufacturers and importers, required under required under OSHA's hazard communication standard to provide appropriate labels on their product containers, including, the name of the product, uh, contact information of the manufacturer, uh, what are some precautionary hazard warnings, direction for use and handling, active ingredients, um, first aid instructions, and any other information pertinent to the safety of the end user or the employee. The military has some marking systems that you should be aware of. Uh, it's used in fixed facilities, may be seen on military vehicles. That you may or may not see that. The military placard system is not necessarily uniform, and some buildings and areas that store hazardous materials may not be marked due to security reasons. But if you look at table 1010 in the manual, that's on pages 415 and 416, it discusses, you know, certain types of markings, whether it's explosive, fire hazard, chemical, or PPE requirement. Uh, when you think about the military, they ship hazardous materials and chemicals by common carrier, or they can. In these instances, the materials are not required to be marked by Department of Transportation or Transport Canada. Uh, the pipeline markings, uh, it must be there must be some significant amount along the pipeline to identify the pipe's location. So I don't know if there's spacing requirements, but if you've got pipelines in your jurisdiction, you will see the signage that gives you an idea of who they are, how to contact, and what to do if they suspect that there's a leak. So in the US and Canada, the signal words, they could be caution, warning, or danger, contain information describing the transported commodity and the name and the emergency phone number of the carrier. Manufacturer's warnings. Uh, U.S. Federal Hazardous Substance Act, which is FSSA, uh, is requires labels on products that are destined for the consumer and in the household, uh, and it must incorporate uh, signal words that give the end user an understanding the hazard associated with the product. So you could see the words caution, which might have minor health effects, warning, which is a moderate health effect, danger, which is the highest degree of hazard, and then poison, uh, in addition to danger on the labels of highly toxic materials. So on this example, we've got danger, which is a high degree of hazard on this substance because it has some type of flammable liquid characteristics. And we already talked about military markings, but this is what you might see. Um, the military has a lot of latitude to pretty much do whatever they want. Um, but you might see markings like this if you have uh, a, a military installation in your jurisdiction. And I think we already talked about this, but just want to go over it again. Uh, the military, you know, they do transport hazardous material, use a common carrier. Um, you're not guaranteed that there's going to be markings on the container or on the vehicle. So just for your information, understanding that military product transport may not necessarily have a label. Again, this is redundant, but we're looking at pipelines and the information necessary to help people understand, you know, that there is a pipeline, uh, what might be being transported in the pipeline, how to contact people, and that signal word, like a warning, that gives everyone an understanding that there could be something that there is a hazard in the pipeline itself. All right, we're shifting gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the NFPA 704 system. Uh, System that is it's widely recognized method for indicating the presence of hazardous materials at commercial, manufacturing, institutional, and other fixed storage facilities. Uh, Commonly required by local ordinance for all occupancies that carry hazardous material, that a 704 placard or label is affixed in approved locations. Uh, its purpose to alert emergency responders to health, flammability, instability, and hazard and related hazards uh, uh, that are occurring inside that fixed building. These hazards may present short-term acute exposures resulting from fire spill or similar uh, emergency. So what is the limitations of an NFPA 704 system? Well, it's not designed for transportation or general public use for the following hazards. Non-emergency occupational exposures, explosive blasting agents, especially at a commercial grade as well, chronic health hazards, and ideological agents and other similar type of hazards. Specifically, it uses a rating system of numbers from 0 to 4. 0 indicates minimal hazard, whereas number 4 indicates a severe hazard. The rating is assigned to 3 categories: health, flammability, and instability. If there are special hazards, they're located in the 6 o'clock position and have no specified background color. However, white is most commonly used. Only 2 special hazard symbols are presently authorized for use in this position by NFPA. The W with the line through it, it's indicating that whatever the substance is, it's reactive with water, and the OX means material is an oxidizer. Inspectors may see other symbols in the white on older and that kind of quadrant on older placards, including the trefoil radiation symbol. So when you look at your slide, uh, we've got the 0 to 4 and instability, flammability, and health, uh, and blue being health, red is flammability, and then 4 is the instability of the material. So these are pretty much, we had just talked about this in the previous slide. That last bullet point is if there's more than one special hazard that's present or has been identified, you can have multiple symbols in at the 6 o'clock position of that of your triangle or of your diamond. Before we get into some of the references, question is, what are some of the other types of markings inspectors might encounter? When you look at pages 412 and 413 of your manual, uh, get familiar with what some of those other markings are and get comfortable with how they can be used or what you might see out in the field. Resource guidebooks. There are several references that are widely used. We've talked about these already, but we have the Emergency Response Guidebook, the ERG, is probably the most popular for the inspector. You've got the NIOSH Pocket Guide for those that it goes into more detail on hazardous material mitigation, and then the hazardous material guide for first responders from the U.S. Fire Administration. So there are some other guides. There are plenty of guidebooks that if you really uh, need to identify um, a hazardous material and its qualities and how to mitigate, those are the guidebooks that are most prevalent. There's also the hazardous material information resource uh, system. So if you're dealing with government facilities, you might have that at your disposal to help identify um, and understand hazardous materials at government facilities. That ERG book is really the primary guide for emergency responders and for inspectors. Currently, the ERG was the current ERG was developed jointly by by Transportation Canada (DOT) and the Mexico Department of Transportation. It's to really to help that emergency responder in quickly identifying the hazards of materials involved in an emergency incident, designed to protect the emergency responder and the general public by giving them quick information on what it is, how to mitigate, and how to control if there is a incident with that material. It's also that useful guide for that inspector, and it should be in your vehicle or at your disposal out in the field should there be an issue of any type of emergency, or I should say hazardous material. Uh, it is worth noting that the ERG does not address all the circumstances with hazardous material, but it does do a good job of identifying the majority of them, and is a great book to start understanding what type of material we're dealing with. So you might ask the question is, well, how does the inspector use that ERG guidebook? Well, you can start by identifying the four-digit identification number on a placard or the shipping papers, and then find the appropriate guide in the yellow boarded pages of the guidebook. You can find the name of the material involved in the blue bordered pages section of the guidebook, and you can identify transportation placard of the material, then use the three-digit guide code associated with the placard in the table of placards and initial response guide to use on scene located in the front of the ERG. So there's some uh, handful of ways that you could back your way into understanding, what type of material incident we're actually dealing with. The NIOSH Pocket Guide, it's a good source for it goes into more detail than the ERG, but it's a reference source of general industrial hygiene information. It provides key information and data in abbreviated or tabular form for over 600 chemicals or groups of chemicals that may be encountered in the work environment. It's essentially designed for occupational safety personnel, employers, and employees, and can provide that quick reference for inspectors. The NIOSH Pocket Guide, MPG, includes the following pieces of information for individual chemicals. So looking at names, synonyms, trade names, conversion factors, abstract services, and registries. You've got exposure limits, what they recommend through NIOSH, permissible exposure limits through OSHA, and NIOSH IDLH values. You can get physical descriptions of the agent, the chemical physical properties, and measurement methods, PPE, respiratory recommendations, and information on health hazards, including routes, symptoms, first aid, and target organ information. So basically, the NIOSH Pocket Guide it really is an expanded version of that emergency resource guide because it goes into more detail about about the effects uh, of a certain chemical, and really help understand what an incident could turn into and how and ways to mitigate. So the NIOSH Pocket Guide is something that if you don't have as inspectors, then your department should have a copy somewhere. The Hazardous Material Guide for First Responder. This is the document put out by the U.S. Fire Academy, and basically it determines resources that are available to emergency responders. Uh, Study indicated that available resources did not meet the specific needs of the awareness or operation levels, so the document was developed. Um, and so it contains material that you can't find in the NIOSH Pocket Guide or the Emergency Response Guide. There are 7 sections Uh, in there, so you've got your index, which is your alphabetical UN number index, your specific material guides, uh, your material summary response table, uh, and that helps summarize information for over 1,400 less commonly encountered materials. Section 4, DOT placards. 5 is silhouettes of rail cars, tank cars, and uh, chemical tanks. Help you understand, the shapes and to be able to determine what type of substance you will have based on the shape of the vehicle or what's being transported. Your section 6, which is the general approach to a hazardous material incident, and the last section 7 is a glossary of terms and abbreviations. The Hazardous Materials Information Resource System. If you look at your slide, I had put uh, the site, the internet site that you could get this information uh, at your disposal. It's a U.S. Department of Defense automated system, uh, and for logistics agency, they developed it. The HMIRS is the central depository of SDSs for the U.S. government, military services, and civil agencies. It contains other valuable information, including HAZCOM, and it also includes data for hazardous materials that the federal government purchased through the Department of Defense and civilian agencies. So, uh, a question: list some of the references used to identify hazardous materials. If you go to page 418 of your manual, uh, again, take a look at it, go over it, understand what those references are, and how you might be able to access and how they can help you to perform your job. So, what is the Canadian Dangerous Goods System? Uh, uh, we need Canada's federal provincial government. They regulate a number of products designated as dangerous goods. Um, it's something that as inspectors at our level, they don't have the authority to enforce. It might be at the next level. They talk about provincial legislation, or and it just need to be aware of what the how it can be uh, uh, enforced and at what level it can be enforced at. All right. As we continue to talk about what they do in Canada, the Controlled Product Regulations under the Hazardous Products Act establishes the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, so WHMIS. It's designed to reduce the risk of hazardous products in the workplace. Health Canada and provincial agency administer WHMIS, and provincial agencies responsible for occupational safety and health normally regulate within their own province. So, as we previously mentioned, inspectors may not have authority to apply these regulations on their own. WHMIS is applicable to federal government employees through the Canadian Labor Code, administered by the Human Resources and Skill Development of Canada. So just make yourself familiar with the WHMIS requirements for employees. Um, the controlled products used, stored, handled, or disposed in the workplace are properly labeled. SDSs are readily available to workers, and that workers receive education and training in the safe storage, handling, usage, and disposal of controlled products in the workplace. So um, just understand that what what uh, WHMIS, what it does, and how it affects the workplace. So regulations require suppliers and distributors and importers to provide labels and SDSs for a WHMIS controlled product that they sell for use in Canadian workplaces. Controlled products include those that they burn regularly, rather readily, they can't explode, and have a toxic reaction, allergies, infectious diseases, or dangerous reaction. Labels and SDS sheets are required. As inspectors, just be familiar with how it impacts uh, the characteristics for suppliers. Uh, what are the critical components uh, that require SDSs be on site? Uh, that they must have a displayed label, and suppliers of controlled products must label all the containers with a supplier label. So there is a requirement to ensure that materials are properly labeled using uh, the proper procedures. The supplier label, must show all texts in English and French and have the proper hatched border and give the product identifier, the supplier identifier, the statement that an SDS is available, the hazard symbol, a pictorial if available, risk phrases I should say, precautionary measures, and first aid measures. The workplace label, however, only needs to show the product identifier, information on safe handling, and a statement that an SDS is available. In your manuals, if you go to table 10.12, uh, gives you uh, uh, illustrations and identify information regarding labeling. The Mexican HAZCOM system. Mexican standards augment the Mexican regulation for the land transport of hazardous material and waste. The Mexican Secretariat for Communications and Transport is responsible for publishing and maintaining the these what they call NAMs, which is in Spanish Normas Oficial Mexicanas, so the regulations. Uh, these will these requirements are the equivalent to our hazard communication standard. Uh, and it also has very similar requirements for workplace requirements for employees. Uh, they've adopted the 704 marking uh, and similar to what we're using in our country. The NAM or policy that's stated here, it pretty much uh, approves that the symboling for hazard is an acceptable means for uh, understanding what type of hazard that we might have. Uh, so they've adopted what universally what the pictorial as the hazard identifier. Placarding and labeling in Mexico, very similar. When you look at shape, color, symbols, numbering, um, might be a couple different changes that we wouldn't normally see here in the United States, but very similar uses to help identify what the hazards might be. Some of the buzzwords or the words that help us understand what type of hazard we have. Um, in What you'll see in Spanish, whether it's radioactive, cryogenic gases, or just a general danger type of placarding. There are some differences between the Mexican transportation regulations and the U.S. Uh, hazardous material regulations. Some of those examples are official Mexican regulations do not authorize the use of dangerous placards. Package markings are consistent except that the proper shipping name is provided in Spanish, not English. The hot mark used for elevated temperatures in the US is not authorized in Mexico, and the Mexican standard regarding the classification of flammable liquids does not incorporate provisions for combustible liquids. Combustible liquid requirements only apply in the United States. Okay, we've got a couple more slides to go, and then we would have wrapped up Objective 6. But we're going to talk about identifying pipe, pipe in the hazardous material world. So not only are we identifying packages in areas where hazardous materials are stored, model fire codes require identification of the piping that conveys hazardous material. Such identification enables plant personnel to trace piping in the event of a leak or spill and stop the event by closing a valve. Pipe labels must identify the contents and also the direction of flow. Labels are required at a maximum spacing of 25 feet. Each change of direction and both sides of floor or ceiling penetrations. So that's pretty clear. Marking of our cylinders. Uh, Many gas consumers believe that the color of a cylinder indicates its hazard, but a cylinder color does not indicate which gas it may store. The only way to identify a cylinder's contents is by labeling or marking the cylinder. Cylinders require markings in accordance with Compressed Gas Association, so CGA, Standard C-7, which is the guide to the preparation of precautionary labeling and marking of compressed gas containers. So the containers have to be marked. Um, the CGA standard tells you how to do it. Uh, Labels are located on the shoulder or the wall of the cylinder, and CGA standard C-7 requires that the marking state the name of the hazardous material, its DOT and UN hazardous material identification label, and hazard division identification number, which is used in the ERG, the Emergency Response Guide. If the compressed gas is an inhalation hazard, warning statements about the hazard are required and its reportable quantity if such a value is assigned by the U.S. Department of Transportation. If the amount of hazardous material released due to an accident exceeds the reportable quantity, its release must be reported to the United States Coast Guard National Response Center.